Oh, there he is.
There it is.
All right. It is my honor. Now I just have to say a few things before we open the floor for Dr. Rubin. I have been privileged to know and work with Dr. Rubin for more than 10 years. He has generously been teaching us for all of that time. Let me tell you a little bit about this gentleman. He is one of the main founders of naturopathic oncology in the United States and internationally. He shepherded the entire board certification process through. He sits on more boards and associations as president and leading member than I can tell you. He has been listed as a leading physician, one of the top physicians in Phoenix for 10 out of the last 11 years. I could go on and on. Let me just say that it is truly an honor, and I'm delighted. And thank you very much for being with us here today. Dr. Daniel Rubin, ask him questions.
Thank you. Oh my God. Well, thank you. That's what do I say after that kind of introduction? I better give some good answers. I'm just kidding. Yeah. So I think this is the second year we've done this Zoom.
Yeah.
Right?
No, first time. But it's the second year you've done it remotely.
Got it. Oh, right. So I think I Zoomed last time.
Yeah.
Well, I do naturopathic oncology. I kind of haven't done anything else that I can remember. I did do a little bit of work in the HIV world when I was just getting going, and it was kind of a moonlighting position through our my alma mater. We had a free clinic that was sponsored by our school and AIDS Project Arizona and a hospital, and so we took a bunch of students over there and just did naturopathic medicine. But as I was getting going, there's a lot of similarities between treating people with viral diseases, especially chronic viral diseases, who are at risk for certain cancers like Kaposi's sarcoma, and the world of oncology, especially back then in the late 90s when everybody was really looking at the immune system and trying to figure out what the heck to do. And we were learning so much. But other than that, it's been pure oncology. And as of about the last decade or so, we started moving into the world of pediatric naturopathic oncology just to fill what appeared to be a huge void at the time, a giant niche that needed to be filled. And so we're slowly doing that. It's a pretty difficult journey working with kids anywhere from 2 months old to, I don't know, whatever a kid is, 17 years old. It's odd. And the longer we're in it, the more we see how many kids out there have cancer and learning that they're really not just little adults. I mean, they really are different in their types of cancers that they get, how they're treated, how resilient they are, how they recur. Their patterns are significantly different than that of adults. So I know in this world, we almost exclusively talk about adults. Rarely are kids given any airtime for any of this, even in the world when I go to my meetings or my chat rooms, because frankly, none of my colleagues see kids with cancer. They just don't. So I can answer questions about that. I think we've learned enough about neuroblastoma, medulloblastoma, acute leukemias, acute lymphomas, hepatoblastoma. Any of the blastomas are really primitive diseases. So we can talk about that. The biggest chunk of my work in the quarter century in adult oncology is certainly where I am and what I do 85% of the time. And my main forte is really integrative work. So for me, we sit on a hospital campus. For the last 15 years, we've positioned our clinic on or near, well, actually more for like the last, more than that, like 16 or 17 years, we've positioned ourselves near or on a hospital campus, or aligned ourselves with MDs or DOs or the greater medical community, with the staunch belief that conventional medicine in a lot of ways, and certainly better than naturopathic medicine or non-conventional medicine, is really good at taking care of the tumor. They're not taking care, at ridding the body of the tumor. Surgeons easily pluck it out of the body, for the most part, easily. You can point a beam at it and you can direct photons or gamma rays or whatever you want via radiation, different ways. And as long as you're a good radiation oncologist, you're not going to miss. And you can swallow a chemical, or you can open up your vein to an antibody or one of the most toxic substances we know of on earth that we can give a human person, like a chemotherapeutic. There are small molecules. There's a multitude of things, immunotherapy, that you can choose from in the world of conventional medicine. And they're really good at getting rid of the tumor for the most part, better than we are. But they're not good at taking care of the body and the human and all of the other things that go with it. Not that good at it, from my perspective, supporting the person going through the journey. And then what about the people that can't tolerate conventional treatments or who don't want it? So there's that whole other world there. And so that's why I believe in integrative medicine. And there's a non-biological social aspect to that too, in terms of cost and availability and doctor skill. And not everybody has access to high level non-conventional therapeutics or physicians based on their financial situation, their familial situation, where they might live in the world. And so I think it's a better way to be it's better to be an expert in integrative medicine than it is to be a naysayer to conventional medicine and to be an expert in only non-conventional medicine, because I think you get way more wins. And wins come in different shapes and sizes too. And I think, in the journey in oncology, learning what a win is something that we're all still learning, because we all constantly battle cancer. So that's the world that I live in every day. That's how my facility, well, we actually have two facilities. We have one in Scottsdale, Arizona, right on the campus of what's called Honor Health. And for those of you not from the area, I'd like to think it's the biggest or one of the biggest health systems in the greater Phoenix area, certainly in the Scottsdale area. It's the main in the Scottsdale area besides Mayo Clinic, but they're closely aligned. And we're right, literally like across the parking lot from the cancer center, and then the research pavilion where they do a lot of treatments. And I don't know, 70% of our patients are referred from those types of docs or medical oncologists. And if you ever go on my website, it's called listenandcare.com, all one word written out, listenandcare.com. You'll see we've had a talk show called Ad Hoc with a Doc, where we just interviewed docs. And it was more like, we're just going to pick a topic and we don't plan anything. The planning is, we may have been friends for some time and we kind of know each other, or, worked on patients together, and we'll just sit down and talk about something and go from there. And then we would film it in-house. If you're interested, and we cover various topics, but we're not, got probably 20 videos up there talking about clinical trials or prostate cancer, or breast cancer, or tumor boards, or just different things that I found interesting. We're starting a new series, actually. It's called the NS Active 5x5 fitness series, because we found that too many of our patients are getting much fatter as they're sitting at home and not doing much. And from an oncology perspective, fat means more body fat percent, less muscle fat, which means greater risk for recurrence for some, especially hormonally driven cancers. And they're not eating as well, and they're sitting around, because a lot of people don't choose fitness. The heavy lifting, as you know, is taking care of the human physicality and mental, emotional, and feeding right. It takes a lot of time to buy food, cook food, clean food, the whole thing, and eat it time after time. And then a lot of people don't feel like working out and so it's just how people are. So we decided that we would resurrect an old program. The program was called NS Active, and it was a fitness program. But now you'll see, we're just about to launch our first footage, and it's really easy. The 5x5 means there's 5 exercises that you do within 5 minutes, and you do them 5 times in a row, 5 days per week. And we think you can do them in about 5 feet of space. And it's just basically trying to have somebody have no excuses for working out at least moving their body, sweating a little bit, changing their oxygen dynamics and their biological response modifier dynamics. So that's for me. Oh, and we'll be talking about like things that I love. I love fitness. I love talking about equipment, physical therapy, how to heal yourself, how to stretch, how not to get injured, how to eat right. And so those are fun things to talk about. So if from an advocacy perspective, we'll probably launch that. Well, heck, we'll probably launch it next week as soon as we sort of get our logo and get our first video edits done. So, and it's fun. It's totally non-complex. It's made for being regular people, not being some kind of crazy workout fanatic. It's made for everybody. And we'll have guests. We'll have medical oncologists doing the exercises with us. We'll have surgeons on board doing the exercises because some people get breast surgery, and we'll do a pod that'll for those of you who just had breast surgery or who've lymphatic cording or something. Here's the things that you can do to help that while still exercising. So we'll expand that, and we'll talk about all different types of things. So I'm pumping it because it's needed. We don't know what kind of lockdown we're going to go into. There's probably another wave coming for whatever reason. And so, then winter's coming, and a lot of people are going to, be inside, and who knows what their access to gyms are going to be. So we figured we'd launch that. So feel free to use it for your clients or patients, and hopefully it'll be fun, but it is just geared for that kind of stuff. So I don't know, that's the kind of stuff that I like to do. And I like to put out and provide content. I'm not really a social media doc. It's difficult to find me on social media because I don't really know how to do it, and I don't really care about it. But it is fun to put out content that's useful for people, I think, in video. And I think we just owe it to people. They're not working out. And so anyhow, it's free. It's not like a paid thing. So Karen, how are we going to do this in terms of Q&A?
Okay, first thing that I need to tell you is I have explained to them that you support naturopathic oncology, as you mentioned previously, supports the rest of the body. Nutrition, immune support, detox. So they understand that. Perhaps we might open it up by your talking a little bit more about each of those areas, and then possibly we could go into terrain or, why they have cancer, what kind of labs are we looking at, what is indicative of changes in the body that would show cancer. How's that sound?
It sounds good, but do people want to just ask questions?
Well, but they'll ask as you talk along.
I know, but like, what's the format? Do they just pop in?
Oh, they'll just pop in, yeah. Wait, this will be more like a conversation.
Okay.
Is that all right?
Yeah, does anybody have a question?
Can you maybe discuss a little bit naturopathic medicine, and maybe a little bit how it differentiates from functional medicine, or a definition or like a framework of conceptual something about naturopathy?
Sure. So naturopathy is the OG of everything, I think, because it was based on folk medicine. So right now, the World Health Organization definition of a traditional naturopath is a traditional healer. And so I'm technically not a naturopath. I'm a naturopathic physician based on WHO terminology. But so many people refer to us, and we even refer to ourselves as naturopaths, because that's not that old of a definition. It's probably 8 years old or something. And so we find our roots in folk medicine, whether it be hydrotherapy or planta medicine or food as medicine, which we still use today, because it's ridiculous that we've strayed so far away from it. It's absurd, but it's just like humankind to do that. Anytime somebody says, oh, you got to drink more water, I mean, technically that's hydrotherapy, right? But we don't really think in modern times in terms of where we came from, and the fact that we used to pick carrots out of the ground, dust them off, and then eat them, right? And our microbiome kind of likes that. And now what do? We buy carrots in a bag that are cut and shaved and dipped in chlorine. So it's like the complete opposite of what we do. So framework from that perspective is we have naturopathic doctors think about that. I don't know that functional medicine docs do. I've only taught some functional medicine courses. We taught oncology, but that was actually 10 years ago. So my experience in the world of functional medicine is that it's more a route for non-naturopathic doctors, conventionalists, or non-physician level practitioners who are still medical, who want to understand the body more from a less, not really from a naturopathic perspective, but more from a normal metabolic, like what normal metabolism is, that they don't really look at in conventional medicine, but it's still the same body. And then using different testing methodologies than you would find in the conventional world, in my opinion, testing methodologies that you're supposed to use because they're looking at the function of the body. And that the term functional medicine is a genius term because it's totally like, I don't know that there's a better term. I mean, it just is based on function. So naturopathic medicine is based on function as well. It's just homeopathy plus nature cure, which is naturopathic medicine. So back in the day, when the study was named, or the type of medicine was named, we didn't have, nobody thought of functional medicine, I guess. I don't know. I wasn't around back then. But it differs because we grow up with a first class being a philosophy class, and the philosophy of how to look at the body. And there's 6 precepts: treat the whole person, treat the cause, the healing power of nature, first do no harm, doctor's teacher, which is my favorite one. And there's another one, but I can't remember it.
If I may interject here for just a moment. You just mentioned doctor as teacher. One of the things, Dr. Rubin, that has most impressed me is how you work with patients. Let me all explain what Dr. Rubin does. He listens. He listens and asking guided questions and teaches along the way. It's a beautiful exchange. And then at the end of every session with every patient, there is a protocol. So just as we have an advocacy plan that continually evolves, Dr. Rubin has protocols that continually evolve based upon progress and labs and everything else that's going on. It's an impressive thing to see, truly.
Well, thanks. And that's the functional aspect of what we do. I'm going to use the word functional because, like I said, it's a genius term and it really explains and it's understandable. It's based on human function. So naturopathic medicine has a more of a heart aspect to it and less of, and I think functional medicine is a little bit more techie. And not that we aren't techie, and we utilize all that stuff and the apps and the testing, but I think there's more creativity, I would like to say, in naturopathic medicine, in my experience, than there is in functional medicine. And it's more protocol based, like I said, because we grew up like this from day one of school, whereas functional medicine is like an additional course. And I know they're moving it in. I think they're trying to move it into more to have courses in medical school, but you don't go to functional medical school and you go to naturopathic medical school. So it's an inherent, intertwined, inbred philosophy of how to look at the body, and you feel it here in your heart, which is why you become a naturopathic doctor. And it's just a little bit different than functional medicine, if that helps. And so
Thank you. That was great.
thank you. As far, go ahead.
Well, I have talked to all of these nurses about when you are diagnosed with cancer, the first question should not be what chemo are we going to use or what surgery, but why do you have it? And naturopathic oncology is excellent at the lab work that goes into determining what is actually going on. And I wonder if you could speak about that.
Naturopathic oncology is looking at that's the terrain that we're talking about.
Yeah, right.
So the word creativity is probably one of the most valuable that I have. My background, which I didn't tell you about, is I have a degree, my BA is in existential philosophy. Not normal, I think, for, yeah. my kind of minor, if you will, is in poetry writing. And so
Oh.
for me, am I a poetic philosopher who looks, that's how I look at each case. And when I create, when I look at lab tests, I don't look at them in isolation, almost never. And that when I order a panel of labs, and a lot of these labs can be done through insurance, which is how we've developed it. From a functional perspective, it's mostly the specialty labs that you would see. And I think you probably talked about them. And I know you had Martha Grout on here. She probably talked about a lot about Genova and Doctor's Data and all the places where you can get microbiomes and Great Plains and GPL tox and mycotox and all these. And they're great. And they fit. The problem with that is they give you a PhD sheet, like a push here dummy sheet. And all you have to do, so I never look at it. I don't think I've probably looked at one if a patient asked me to, but those are always at the end and they give you patterns and stuff. And I don't like them. I think that's just not the way to do it. And there are, unfortunately, a lot of docs who, or practitioners who use that and they create like customized vitamin packs based on that. Like it's a whole system. You know what? For some people it works. Some people get better. For some people who don't have access to somebody like myself, that's, for me, that's not acceptable in my practice because I'm not being a doctor. I'm not creating something. I'm using something somebody else created. And that's why creativity for me, if you lose creativity in medicine, I think you lose, in my opinion, the way I do things. And I have to be very careful how I word things. But for me, if I lost my creativity, I would sort of lose my place in my practice or where I am, and I would probably cease to exist. I would annihilate what I do. But that's why I keep coming back after, I think I'm 25 years in, 20, 24, something like that, years in oncology. And you got to, you've been doing something for 24 years, you got to keep it real. And so from a philosophy perspective, I think it's the best background because I was taught how to argue. I'm like a professional arguer, right? Philosophy, you learn how to create an argument. That's what I do every day in oncology because guess what? We still don't know. People are still getting cancer. People are still dying from cancer. We have some fancy, pretty cool new medicines. But the philosophy is about the same. But we got a lot of cool immunotherapeutics right now. And I said probably about 8 years ago or 10 years ago, I'm like, the next decade is going to be really important. And I think we're going to see less of a reliance on the need for alternatives. And I think integrative is going to be the way. This was my prediction because I saw that conventional medicine was moving more towards biologicals and less towards or more away from conventional chemotherapeutics. There's no abandonment there, but look at CAR T cell, look at the PD-L1 inhibitors, the Pembro or the Keytrudas and the Opdivos and the palbociclibs or the Ibrances. I mean, you see the commercials on TV. Well, not that we really watch TV, but you know what I mean. There's more movement towards biological agents, which is, it's a good time, Anyhow, so philosophy is really important. And I think that's really a distinguishing factor in naturopathic versus functional medicine is that we have our own particular philosophy. So going back to those lab tests, which coming off my tangent, is if we can create a panel of maybe 17 vials of blood, just to give you an idea of how many lab tests we may order on a person, to generally look at what some would refer to the oncometabolic milieu or the terrain or what the heck is going on in the body. Or I would think, how can the milieu where the tumor is or the tumor blood interface, how can that be reported in the body, in the blood? I only get to see what's floating by the AC vein, if you stick a needle in the port, that's all we get, so you have to you have to create every day. You have to create your own narrative on it. And then you have to tell it to the patient and you have to have them understand it. So they're, a partner with you because you're asking them to do a lot of stuff in my world. Change their lifestyle, eat certain things, drink certain things, or not eat certain things, or not do certain things, or take things, or come into the clinic, or do things that they don't want to do, like chemotherapy. I mean, there's a lot there. And so for me, if you can't really take a peek at their terrain and tell them a story, it's hard to, I mean, you can still do medicine, but I'm a big lab guy. And so I look at it in different phases, I guess, or different steps. So let's say somebody recovered from cancer and now they're being surveyed, meaning there's a chance that, I mean, the only reason you go back to the doctor, get a surveillance scan or do lab tests is because you have a chance that you could have a recurrence. I mean, otherwise there's no reason to go back to the oncologist. You just go to your primary care and just get checkups. So obviously most people, there's a chance for recurrence. A lot of people recur. So if somebody is fine and then they get a symptom, most of the time they're going to get a scan. And a lot of times that symptoms say they get a bone pain. In oncology, the rule is prove it's not cancer before anything else. Don't say, oh, you'll be fine, go to PT. It's like you get a pain, you got to check it out. So you don't want somebody to get a symptom because now you've got a frank tumor and now you got to treat it. And sometimes that's more difficult than treating the primary tumor. So surveillance scans is one step back from that. Meaning, hey, you could find a tumor in somebody before they get a pain, meaning it's smaller, it may be surgically manageable, or you may be able to take a medicine or something, radiation or something, or observation, but at least it's there before they get a symptom. Before that, in my eyes, is looking at something called circulating tumor cells. So if we can look in the body and do a test, an insurance covered and Medicare covered test called circulating tumor cells, to look to see if somebody has something floating around that may give them a metastatic deposit or signal that there's still something evident in the body, that's going back even another step. That's 2 steps before a symptom. The lab testing that we've been talking about is even a step before that, because we're looking at the overall terrain, hormones, inflammatory markers, tumor growth factors, blood lipids, blood counts, metabolic profiles, anything you can look for. The more labs, the better. So I'm thinking, heck, if I can do these labs, I can prevent these circulating tumor cells from giving a lesion, from giving a symptom. I'm 3 steps removed, keeping people well, which is why I push for labs. Otherwise, you're just using physician's choice. You're not really using any kind of like assay guided issue or anything like that. And for me, that's just really important. That's where I see things.
Well, what would be some of the lab approaches that you would take? The interleukins, there are regular things that I've seen you do repeatedly. If you could review that for the students, that would be really helpful. I mean, one time you told me ILE is the roadmap to cancer.
Oh, no. It's not the roadmap to cancer. It's, now you just made me forget. I say it every day. It's the red carpet for cancer.
Red carpet, that's it.
Wait, can you repeat what that was again, Karen?
No, Dr. Rubin is.
Oh, it's something called interleukin 8. Interleukin 8. And literally, it's just the red carpet for cancer cells. Interleukins are a family of biological response modifiers that were first characterized for their ability to be soluble communication molecules between white blood cells. Probably heard of interleukin 1, because if you've read anything on the cytokine storm related to COVID, then you see that interleukin 1 was one of the main ones implicated because it's an inflammatory cytokine. By the way, there was a huge study that was just published like last week or 2 weeks ago out of Haifa, Israel. It was like 1,800 people with cancer that showed that the worse your white count is, the less COVID you get when you're in chemotherapy, because you don't have the oomph, you don't have those neutrophils to stimulate the cytokine storm to give you the COVID symptoms, which is just totally in line with what Karen's class is about. And there's this grand theme I know, because I've been doing this for a few years, about anti-inflammation, and that we as humans, for the most part, live under the auspices of an inflammatory society. You know, whether we sit in a cubicle without light or under fictitious light and we're sitting, and then we go to the vending machine, you know, we have bosses that we don't like, or we come home mad, we don't exercise, we don't get enough sleep, or we use light until the, you know, late night hours, and, you know, all the bad stuff that a lot of America does and is used to. We eat nutritionally deplete food, and we take anti-inflammatories, and we take antacids and antibiotics and antihypertensive and anti-lipids, and, you know, it's all anti. There's no pro. But the point is that if you look at what's going on with a certain virus that's around, and the cytokine storm, I mean, I think this was like one of the definitive studies to say, like, guess what? If the inflammatory cells aren't there, you don't really get the symptoms, and you just have a virus that kind of moves through your body. I thought it was fascinating. I don't know how I got on that subject. We were talking about interleukins. We were talking about the cytokine storm. Okay, so another one, and I mean, I've been living in the world of the cytokine storm for, I don't know, since 1999, because we used to make our own cytokines when we had a vaccine in an immunotherapy clinic in Tempe, Arizona. We started out making, literally, we made personalized dendritic cell vaccines. And this is before the FDA was like, you can't do that. It was like a vitamin C/immune therapy clinic. It was an original one, and we did great. But you can't do that anymore because that's a drug. I mean, it kind of is a drug. And so, you know, for me, I'd be like, we're just modifying people's blood. That's all we were doing. And then we were giving it back to them. It was everything from a person, but it had drug capacity or drug qualities because you had to use prescription level cytokines and interleukins to modify those immune cells to make them effector cells and then put them back in the body. It's too bad, because you've probably heard of a anti-prostate cancer drug called Provenge, maybe, which is a dendritic cell therapy. So it's quite similar to what we used to do, except it's an off-the-shelf, meaning you're basically taking somebody's cells, and then you're grabbing something off the shelf and you're mixing it together, hoping that this tumor information is akin to the person's prostate cancer tumor, and then putting it in the body and kind of hoping. Whereas we would take it from a person's own tumor, and then we would take their own blood and we would commingle that, because they were having trouble doing it in the body. So it was sort of like an ex vivo stimulation, and then we put it in vivo. That's just classic dendritic cell therapy, but we can't do that anymore.
What is dendritic cell therapy? I'm not sure I understand.
So along the lines, just to tie it back into the interleukins guide functions in the body. And they're not just about white blood cells anymore. Interleukins, I mean, for instance, interleukin 6, which is just a nasty, especially if you have a patient who is not faring well, they're not eating well, they're anorexic, they're losing lean muscle, they're totally fatigued, especially post-radiation or mid-radiation. Usually, here's a clinical pearl, day 11 of radiation is when interleukin 6 really kicks up. Anyhow, interleukin 6 is great if you're battling a fungal infection or a bacterial infection, then you want it because it's a B cell cytokine. But it's not good from a chronic perspective, and we have to fight interleukin 6 a lot because it wipes your lean muscle off and makes you feel like crap. And so it is an inflammatory cytokine. And so a dendritic cell is, you've heard of dendrites, like coming off of a nerve cell. And a dendritic cell is an immune cell that basically has dendrites, except they're not for neurological purposes. They're just for like signaling purposes. And so like 25% of your skin surface is dendritic cell. Why? Because you have so much immune challenge coming in with, you know, the organ that faces the world, basically.
Would those dendritic extensions, would they have microtubules in them, much like axons and dendrites within the nervous system?
So they wouldn't. They would just be more connective, like just arms. And so they wouldn't be neurologically relevant. But dendritic cells, don't think of them like that. That's dendritic cells. They may reach out and grab some kind of antigen or grab a bacteria or grab something, because what they really are antigen presenting cells. So they go get info. They process that info, and then they bring it back to the T cells. And then the T cells, this is what we're doing right now. I went and grabbed a bunch of info, and now I'm presenting it to Karen. And Karen's forming an army that's going to go out and fight. So,
We're trying, we're trying.
right? And so this is the army. And so the dendritic cell, much like a macrophage or a monocyte, go out and they get info. So if you have a cancer cell that got hit by radiation and it's dying, and it goes through a process called apoptosis, or it's spelled apoptosis, but it's not pronounced that way. I promise you it's apoptosis, and I can prove it. So if you ever hear somebody say apoptosis, we don't allow that word in our clinic. It's apoptosis. So ptosis, remember like ptosis, when you have ptosis of the eyelid, that means kind of a shutting down, and apo means before. So apoptosis. As the cancer cell is starting to shut down, phosphatidylserine pops up, acts as a beacon, and the dendritic cell, or the antigen presenting cell, can see that phosphatidylserine. And it literally goes and finds that, and then gets the cell as a whole and engulfs it.
Phosphatidylserine serves as part of the apoptosis. I mean, I take it at night just because of short-term memory stuff.
Yeah, so it's functional, but we use it. It's an intracellular signal molecule that is an apoptotic signaler. So remember, on a cell surface, you have a lot of things sticking up: tumor markers, cluster designations, HLAs, channels, like sodium potassium pumps, like all this stuff. Look, you live in the world of oncology, you need to go back to every basic science. It's why we literally learn basic science. You go back to embryology, which is, year one, day one, class one, right? How did a human form? You don't get to pass go in oncology unless you know embryology somewhat. Why? We started this discussion talking about blastomas in pediatrics. If I take a 2-month-old, they're not that far away from embryology. They were embryos a little less than a year ago. And so anytime you get a cancer cell, the more serious, the more hardcore, the more aggressive that cancer cell, the more like an embryonic cell that is, the more like a stem cell that is. So anyhow, I don't know how I got on that. Oh yeah, we're
I
talking.
know, but that's really interesting.
Yeah, that's why I don't think people, I don't really know this is how I think of it as an ND, as a naturopathic oncologist. I don't know if they think about that in the world of conventional oncology. I don't know that they have to have that discussion. I have to have that discussion. But you realize that, basic sciences are there for a reason. It's not just so you can get to the next class, so you can get to touch a patient, so you get to order a test, so you get a license, so you can prescribe. You have to know embryology. You have to at least respect embryology. And so look, you read a path report, and if I don't go over the path report, I can't really get an idea of what the heck is going on, because a breast cancer is not just a breast cancer. There's so many variants of breast cancer. And you're going to read about the differentiation. And if it's a poorly differentiated cancer, hang on, because that thing's more like a stem cell. That thing's less like a mature breast cell, and it's more like a cancer stem cell than a well-differentiated tumor. And so that just gets back to differentiation. We're still talking about antigen presenting cells. So I was talking about interleukin 6, and I was talking about things on a cell like HLA typing, cluster designations, CD markers. So when the dendritic cell comes and gets all that and engulfs it, it's going to extract certain pieces of information. And it has an intelligence, and it's going to extract that information. It's going to go through a maturation process that happens as it sort of moves through different layers of the basement membranes and connective tissue, so it can home back to the lymph nodes where the T cells live. And it's literally going to give a PowerPoint presentation on what it found. And if it does a good job and it extracted the right info, and it gives a good presentation, and the T cells are standing by and listening, and you should get an army against that particular type of cancer cell, which is why I look at radiation as a chance for an auto vaccination. I like radiation. Yeah, duh, it's toxic, but so is Wi-Fi. And like near 100% of the people we're going to deal with are bombarded with Wi-Fi all the time. And so is it really that bad to get a little bit more radiation? People are freaked out about radiation. They need to detox it. And I mean, what they don't think about is what's in their pocket, or, the 5G tower that they, just put up. And I think it's great because it's so fast. And so that's, on an ongoing basis can be worse for people than just a little gamma ray that's completely targeted at one little area in the body, even though you might come at it from different places, right? Remember, radiation goes in one way, but it comes out a whole bunch of ways. So that's, that's one of the things to think about. So radiation, like I said earlier in this, it's hard to miss, right? I mean, we have good machines and we have really incredibly intelligent radiation oncologists, and they don't miss. So for me, I look at it as provision of antigen in which to engage an in vivo auto vaccination process. And so my approach to the person with radiation is stimulate the heck out of, test it, then stimulate the heck out of the immune system, focus on it, push them on it. And then once they're done with radiation, crank the volume up. You got a real chance to give somebody maybe a lifelong immunization against their cancer, just giving them some herbs and supplements and injections and stuff. And so that's just my philosophy. I don't know if that's taught anywhere. It's functional, right? But I don't know that functional medicine teaches that. It's just what happens in the body, it's just, so that's why for me, I think functional medicine is a genius name, and you have to create your narrative. Everybody's body works the same, right? It's just, there's a different storyboard for each person's body and how they got the cancer, how they're going to go about it. And so that's why for me, philosophy is the most important. And if I lose my creativity, I've been annihilated. And I remember the first time I really brought out the creativity tip, it was like 2000, I don't know, like 4 or something like that, or 2003. And I was co-lecturing with one of the heads of the myeloma department at Mayo. I don't know how I got the gig. I was the only ND guy doing stuff in town, right? And this is in Tempe. And I gave my thing, and then he gave his thing, and then we both had we were up there kind of like getting Q&As, and I got asked the quintessential annoying question: what about the research? Where's all the double blind and the research? And I'm a practitioner that I don't really care that much about it. While I appreciate it, and you can see I'm very vocal and candid and seasoned enough now, and Karen's probably seen a change in me over the years, but I kind of know what's going on. There's enough fictition in medical reporting that I don't necessarily know what's real. And I certainly 100% of the time know that everybody sitting in front of me is a total N of 1. And so many times doesn't fit into the framework of certain controlled studies, right? But when you have the type of, especially back then, data that you're trying to find, that's when you annihilate the creativity. And that's why I feel very good understanding the function of the body, looking at it from an individual perspective, pathology, radiology, lab medicine, clinical diagnostics, and then applying the principles of naturopathic medicine and the principles of human biochemistry and physiology straight out of the book that everybody read to the person in front of me, because I know how my stuff works, right? So it's really often that I will have one of my protocols. Well, it's always that my protocols get submitted to pediatric oncology teams because I make the patient do it. A lot of times I'm just not there, I'm not in the hospital with them. And very often our protocols end up going to the pharma side because we're co-managing when somebody's on a clinical trial. And I'm an ethicist. So I know that, look, if somebody signs up for a clinical trial, they're taking an obligation, and I'm not going to say, oh, don't just hide this. It's not going to interfere with that drug, but don't tell them you're on it. That way you can take it. That's not my personality. I'm like, you better disclose this stuff, or that's just ethics, and then they can do what they want. But so they'll get submitted to pharma. We just had one out of, I think it was Sloan Kettering. I was flabbergasted that my entire protocol was accepted. I'm like, really? But I was like, okay, that's cool. So either people are getting looser or we're getting better at what we're doing. But that's my opinion on how to approach the person, why I do lab testing, how I integrate functional, how I integrate naturopathic, interleukins, the immune system, how to have a narrative and approach a person. And this isn't something that's immediately teachable. I mean, this is something that I've developed over years, but it's why I think I continue to have a practice is because I literally, like Karen was saying, the protocols, I mean, they could be 5 pages long and they're always in 3 parts: issues, testing, and treatment. Always. Issues, any issue that I need to remember. If the staff pulls it up, they're always pulling up the protocol, so you don't have to fish through notes. Issues, so the patient knows what I'm thinking about, so they remember what the issues were. If I have a patient that's, I don't know, a genealogist or something, I'm going to write down, I'm going to remember that they are because they think in terms of genes. So I can structure what I tell them genomically and talk to them about that so they can understand the narrative that I'm creating about them. I'm going to talk about, I might write down by certain things, my interpretation. When I interpret the labs, I mean, I got to remember it too, because I got to come back to it. And if you have 1,000 patients, you're a couple hundred patients you're dealing with in a week, you're going to forget about that patient. You're on to the next one. I might see somebody with breast cancer. Next patient may be 3 years old and have hepatoblastoma. The next one may be, 82 years old with a CLL. And then the next one might be, a 19-year-old with an ocular melanoma. Like, it's so vast. And how do you do good quality individual work when you're jumping around like that? Well, you don't do a high level of work when you're just getting going, unless you know what the heck you're doing. But the body isn't different for everybody's body. It's manifested different, but it's not different. It's still the same physiology. So anyhow, galectin-3 is an interesting molecule, and you can test galectin-3. All your cardiac patients should have a galectin-3. Why the cardiologists aren't running galectin-3s? I
Can
mean,
you spell that?
THAT, kidding. GALECTIN, galactin-3, galectin-3. Look it up. Look at what's printed on the freaking LabCorp page. It talks all about the higher your galectin-3, the worse your cardiac structure remodels after an MI. Period. The end. Normal's up to 22.2. The higher you are, the more fibrosis you have, the less well your cardiac system is going to work, because your heart is a bunch of scar tissue. I don't think I've ever once seen a cardiologist run a galectin-3. It's standard on. And so why do I run it? I run it because it's an inflammatory molecule. It's like the ringleader of the cytokine storm, especially for COVID. In fact, the spike protein on COVID is similar to the galectin-3 binding domain. It's like, I think it's homologous, in fact. So I don't know, there's only one known galectin-3 blocker. It's modified citrus pectin. But galectin-3 is a pro-circulating tumor cell agent. It's a total inflammatory marker. And you'll see, especially your patients with metabolic syndrome will have high galectin-3s in the above 22.2. The cutoff, the optimal cutoff is 13. So if they're below 13, you could probably ignore it. If they're above 13, they probably need some modification. Maybe they need a supplement. Some people, I think, just naturally produce more galectin-3, which is why they have inflammatory disease or stuff like that. So you don't know. Some people, this is written in their genes. Sometimes you can't do anything about it. It's how they are, but it answers questions. If you resolve yourself to be like, well, I've tried everything, I've done everything. Maybe that's just how you are, and we just got to deal with that. And so that's a resolution you can make, and you just treat them. Anyhow.
That's fascinating. I mean, I worked in coronary care for many, many years. I never saw galectin-3.
Right, and especially those your fibrosis patients. If somebody has a fatty liver and they're going to fibrose or get cirrhosis, or they're going to fibrose their renal system, or just people who are fibrotic, always achy, they myelofibrotic, uterine fibrotic, endometrial fibroids, fibra. FIBR is a really important root because it's fibrin, it's fibrinogen, it's fibrotic, it's fiber, it's, they're scarring down is what it is. They're just scarring down. And
Would this be part of, with COVID, there is a serious cardiac issue that arises for many patients, including my sister who has had a rough time with COVID and cardiac wise. So would galectin-3 be a player in that?
totally. I would be surprised if it wasn't. And a lot of times you can reverse or at least stop it by using a lot of that pectosol C.
Pectosol C, yeah.
So that's the Isaac Elias product. There's several modified citrus pectin products on the market, but the one that's the smallest kilodalton size and the only one that's patented and studied literally where the data is the Pectosol C product.
Yeah, which you put on most of your patients are on Pectosol C.
Yeah, you
that
got
I've
it.
seen, yeah.
Yeah, in some patients have a bowel sensitivity because it does act as a prebiotic. So that's really the only thing I think we watch out for. Otherwise, you can get it through a feeding tube for the most part. Yeah, there's a lot of people who, well, somebody just posted something on it. Somebody in Hebrew?
That's one of our RN patient advocates, Shayna,
sweet.
who's signing her name.
Okay. Got it. Thank you. That's really cool. Yeah, I'm on Isaac's board. Isaac Elias owns that company. He's from Israel. He's Israeli.
Right. I took a client to him.
That's what?
I took a client to him. It was fascinating.
That's
I knew
sweet.
I'd seen galectin-3.
So Isaac developed a process. Your client probably went through his pheresis procedure.
I don't know, not at this point. He passed away. But, yeah.
So a guy named Rigdon Lintz, who was I believe he was in Tennessee in the 90s. I think he got kicked out of the country for he was pulling tumor necrosis factor alpha out of the blood, like with a pheresis machine, and then putting the blood back in. And that was the treatment for cancer. He's in Germany. Actually, his wife, I think, was interviewed. You might have seen it. There's a new Ralph Moss produced video. Ralph Moss is back on the scene, by the way.
Oh, I haven't told him about Ralph Moss yet.
Okay, so Ralph Moss, I'll just say, you've probably seen it. He's all like hipped up now. He's like hyped up because his son and his grandson partnered with him, and now they're like very active on social media. And they produced a video that just launched last month called Immunotherapy: The Power Within. And they interview Ralph Kleef, who's in Austria, who we've known for many years, Mark Rosenberg, who's in Boca Raton, Dr. Ferry, who is in Orange County, and then a couple German doctors, and then the Lentzes are there. So they have a really interesting pheresis procedure. Well, Dr. Isaac Elias, who's an MD, who is very naturopathically minded and has a company called Clinical Synergy and Econugenics, who it's a supplement company up in Santa Rosa, and his clinic's Amitabha Clinic. But Isaac's not there. He spends most of his time literally running like week-long meditation retreats. He's ridiculously spiritual. All his formulas are invented by himself, and they're all yin-yang balanced because he's very Eastern philosophy minded, very balanced individual. He's Israeli. I find him fascinating, incredibly brilliant. Well, he developed a procedure by using dialysis units where you can pherese out and filter out fibrinogen basically from the system. And I think he's going through patenting right now and stuff. So I think he's developing his own treatment for cancer. So I haven't had a patient who's done it. It's very expensive. It's very complex. It's very high end, but it's fascinating. But to that extent, you've got fibrinogen, and fibrinogen's a huge deal. Huge deal. I mean, I measure fibrinogen antigen, fibrinogen activity, thrombin, antithrombin, D-dimer, plasminogen activator inhibitor 1. I mean, that's a whole clot cascade. I mean, not just for somebody who's on tamoxifen who has a high risk for clot, and then include homocysteine in there, galectin-3, but that whole clot pathway is really, really important. And what happens, if you think about it, you've got a tumor blood vessel interface, right? Because if somebody has a tumor, it's angiogenic. You have to feed the beast and you have to remove waste. It's an organ, it's an entity, and it requires blood flow for life. The thing about a tumor is that it's usually so hypoxic that it's so greatly signaling to the body to produce new blood vasculature that you've got such a high turnover for angiogenesis that you've got bad angiogenesis. So and I think of it this way. Imagine a really intense cloverleaf highway interchange. And now imagine if a 5-year-old designed it. People would be crashing into walls and flying off of, the 3rd story. That's the type of blood vasculature you have in a tumor. And so what ends up happening is there's a lot of flow in, but there's very little flow out. Same thing with the lymphatics. There's a lot of efferent or a lot of afferent, but not a lot of efferent flow, right? So you end up getting these really high pressures inside of tumors. And so it's higher pressure than the blood pressure. Now we're going back to high school, right? Where we're talking about like Boyle's law or something or osmosis. You can't get something from a low to a high pressure. It's always from a high to a low pressure. That's true. That's one of the reasons Avastin works so well, right? That drug Avastin, that bevacizumab anti-VEGF antibody, because it reduces a molecule or neutralizes a molecule called VEGF or vascular endothelial growth factor. Look in the plasma for that, run a VEGF plasma. And that when you reduce that, you reduce the neovascularization of tumors. So it's a strategy not only to decrease the growth, but it also lowers the intratumoral blood pressure, the intratumoral pressure. So now you equalize it. So where's chemotherapy? It's in the blood, right? Where's the medicine you swallow, the palbociclib or the abemaciclib or the whatever you're swallowing? It's in the blood. So how do you get it to the tumor? Through the blood. So you got to lower the intratumoral pressure. Because if you don't, it's the storm drain analogy. This is how I speak to patients. I like to tell them stories. I think storytelling in cancer is important.
Well, so if you are able to control the VEGF, then you're going to reduce the pressure, which means increased access of the chemo to the tumor cell. Yeah.
And that's all about fibrinogen. So think of it this way. Think of living in a city where you have deciduous trees in the fall and the leaves fall off and you have a sewer system and it rains. And in that time of the year, leaves are covering the storm drains. And so when the water's flowing down along the curb, if there's leaves there, it can't go down into the sewer. It cruises along to the next drain. Well, if this is the tumor, and you've got a bunch of fibrinogen at the interface to the main blood system, then that chemotherapy is going to kind of find a way in. It's going to just go on because it can't get in. And so that may be a chemo failure.
God, well, that means the stuff that Elias is doing, getting rid of fibrinogen by some whatever he's coming up with, that would be that would change the entire field.
And that's why, yes, it could. And that's why I spend so much time reducing fibrinogen and measuring it on people. And especially you'll have people that are really stubborn. So think of it this way too. So then you've got a lot of that fibrinogen in the tumor. And so there may be these nests of viable tumor cells that are highly protected by this connective tissue that doesn't go away. And the more you put in it, the more it builds, the more it protects them. And so you might not really look like a viable tumor, but they're there. And that's where a recurrence can come from too, because they're just sitting there living, nestled in there.
Well, so how do you control VEGF?
So VEGF, you got to control. That's why you got to get them to exercise and de-inflame, because you got to clear that biological crap out. And you might, you give them, VEGF, you can give them certain supplements. That's not the recipe. That's functional. Functional is if you have a high VEGF, you give this. And so maybe you give vascustatin, or maybe you give melatonin, 'cause it's an anti-VEGF, or curcumin, or quercetin, or all these things that are really like, say that has anti-VEGF activity. Vitamin C is like one of the IV vitamin C is one of its main activities is anti-VEGF, anti-angiogenic. Nobody knows it. Only the true vitamin C people really know that you use it as an anti-angiogenic. The problem with vitamin C is, what does it produce? It produces collagen. That's more connective tissue. So you got to be careful with some people. If somebody's a heavy collagen producer, you could be nesting a tumor in there too. You could be insulating it because you're producing it. Like certain breast cancers have a lot of lysyl oxidase in them, certain ones. So if you get a really dense breasted woman and there's a lot of connective tissue, or there's fibrosis, you got to think, all right, should I be giving this person vitamin C? Maybe it's just going to make more connective tissue, and that's not what I want. So you use a different strategy with them.
How do you reduce fibrinogen, or why would someone be producing a lot of it?
Well, they could be genetically producing it, or it's a response to inflammation. They could have a microorganism. They could have bad blood flow. I mean, when you get a paper cut, you produce a lot of fibrin to heal that paper cut. So imagine anytime you have an invasive interface at a tumor, what is the body going to do? It's going to put down fibrin. It's how it defends itself. So it's not just reducing it. You have to have a narrative. You have to understand it the whole way around, or else it's just this for that. And that's what I think. I think what functional medicine, naturopathic medicine, whatever we want to do, is really be able to, in your mind's eye, see it all at once. But you're in a high volume practice, you're moving really fast. So my focus is lab testing and looking at it from that perspective. I'm not a mind body guy. I used to be an injection guy. I'm not an injection guy anymore because there's so many things they took away from us. I can't do a lot of the stuff I used to do. So I live in the world of labs, and it brings constant reverence for the human physiology every day. I developed looking at different patterns. I can find them. And so I can kind of, you get in your groove. But what do you do for fibrinogen? I don't know. I mean, it depends. Why is the fibrinogen there? So that's the question you ask. So if I were to pick one, I'd say get them out exercising. It changes your oxygen dynamics. It opens the little blood vessels. I mean, think about neuropathy, peripheral neuropathy from chemotherapy. I mean, my theory on that is, where do you get peripheral neuropathy? You get it the farthest away from your heart, where the blood flow is the blood pressure is the least, the capillaries are the smallest, and the blood flow doesn't go there first. It's not as high pressure. So you get a lot of buildup of crap. And so a lot of neuropathy, I just have people do hot water hand soaks or hot water foot soaks, and then have them do vigorous massage on their finger or toe tips. Break up the biological crap, dilate the vasculature so you can get it out of there, bring nourishment to the nerves, because there is some neurotoxicity, obviously, but a lot of it is blood flow, inflammatory blood flow. People are cold, so that's fibrinogen deposition. So anytime there's an injury, you're going to get fibrinogen deposition. But sometimes it's normal fibrin deposition, but you can't break down the fibrin. So some people have a deficiency. They might have a lot of plasminogen activator inhibitor. So plasminogen breaks down fibrin. So if you have a plasminogen activator, that's great. But if you have a plasminogen activator inhibitor, that's not so good. So it might not be that you have to stop fibrinogen. It might be that you're not breaking down the end result. So there's a ton of complexity for me in that, but it's critical to the treatment of people with cancer. You've probably heard of a lot of people doing like Kelly's enzyme therapy.
Yeah, what do you think about Kelly? I mean, I forget his disciple in New York who died 5 years ago with a whole bunch of people. The Kelly protocol, which saved my sister's life, by the way.
Why?
Is anybody practicing that kind of stuff anymore?
I think probably Greg Nye up in Portland is the only guy that I know of. Maybe, I don't know if Michael Usick in Tucson does. We tried it for a while. I don't. I've just never been an enzyme guy. I think it's just a lot of people can't tolerate it. We used to scoop proteolytics in people. But I think since I'm so in the integrative world and people tend to have lower mucous membranes and, less GI rigidity, you could create an ulcerative issue. You might get a peritonitis if you're feeding people tons of enzymes and you kind of burn a hole in their gut. So I think even with enteric coated, you have to focus on that. So my opinion is you can't do other things. And so I try and shut down that fibrinogen and loosen it up, or get to the cause, or get them out exercising, or reduce the inflammation, or find a cause, versus just give the enzyme. I'm just not great at that. I give nattokinase sometimes, which is easier to get to, or lumbrokinase. Nattokinase works in the tissue. Lumbrokinase usually works in the blood. But you got to be careful with that too, because if somebody's thrombocytopenic, or they have low clotting factors because they have liver toxicity from chemotherapy and they can't produce their clotting factors, it just gets tangled, and you don't want somebody to bleed out. So you got to be careful. And I think it's a hairy situation.
Well, could we switch gears and let me give you a case? And you bring us through this case. And this is a case, it's from like 10 years ago. 60-year-old woman shows up, overweight, smoker, hair dye, drinks a lot of wine, and she's just been diagnosed with stage 4 non-Hodgkin's B-cell type lymphoma. And she grew up near Love Canal. For those of you who don't know or don't remember, Love Canal is where they did a lot of industrial chemical dumping in Western New York, a little bit east of Buffalo, and kids got contaminated.
So wait, she's smoker, drinker, overweight, bad diet.
Yeah.
Non-Hodgkin's B cell.
Yeah.
Stage 4, above and below the diaphragm. Is she sick?
Yeah, she's sick. And they told her there was nothing they could do. And so she called me and she said, is there something? And we came right into your office.
Well, you got to detox it. And the first thing you do is you got to see what the person wants and if they want to live. Because you would think that most people are intelligent enough to know that those are toxins to the body, but there's a reason that they've been putting those toxins in. And some people can tolerate that, right? I think that's the benefit of genes. Look, some people can go run a 200-mile ultra marathon quickly and their body can get through it. Some people can't even make it 50 miles. Some people can't even run 18 miles, right? That's a lot genetics. And so why did that person do that in the first place? And so we decide, do they want to do something? Because this is going to be a long road. Their body's just sort of, the barrel's has been overflowing for a lot of years. The lymph is full. The lymph finally said, forget it. I'm not dealing with this, and just couldn't hold it together anymore. So they developed a clone of cells and it just started proliferating in the lymph system. So obviously the first thing to do is to try and stop the cancer. So probably putting this person on some IV vitamin C is a knee-jerk reaction for somebody with non-Hodgkin's, period, the end. And right there, that could really be a treatment that creates stability. But you got to think, you're putting a lot, you got to give them high dose frequent treatment. So you're putting a lot of stuff in an already coagulated body, or like dirty body. So you got to help this person understand the value of changing their diet and exercising, because they got to clean out. And it doesn't have to be that hard. So you think about, how does the body get rid of stuff? You could cleanse this person. Colonics, coffee enemas is a great place to start. But you've got to sort of think about clearing the bowel before you start clearing the lymph, because remember, the lymph always dumps into the heart, and then the heart pumps the metabolic waste around and gets it out through the kidneys and the liver. So liver, remember, lymph doesn't dump directly into the bowel. So you got to go through the liver first to get into the bowel technique. So I would think about detoxifying this person, probably through lifestyle and not really through medicines first. So one of the first steps of detox is to stop the retox. So you work on that level.
Well,
Hydrate.
one of the first things that you did in your labs, as you've expressed, you are a lab guy. Her heavy metals were off the chart,
No,
totally off the chart. And so you started her on, you were working with grout at that time and got her started on chelation.
can you text me the last name?
Yeah.
Yeah, let me look it up.
It was a fascinating case and you brought her right through and she's fine.
She is?
Yeah. She listened to you
Oh,
and she did what she was supposed to do.
I'm waiting for this name to come through because I gotta see.
Dr. Rubin, I have a really good case for you.
Well, hang on. Let me see. Did you text it, Karen?
I'm doing it right now.
Let me just check this out real quick to see if there's any keynotes, and then let's go through that case.
Oh, you were going to actually look it up right now.
Oh, yeah.
He's
I can
fascinated.
think about anything else right now.
There you go. You got it.
Okay, I'm waiting for it.
I just thought it would be interesting to go through a case so they could see the progression,
Yeah. Yeah, I'm like looking at my text messages, waiting for this thing to come through. Nothing yet. Did you email or text?
No, I texted you.
Come on.
Are there people trying to make that ex vivo, the immunization stuff, the injection stuff that you used to do that is now no longer possible? Are there people trying to get those regulations removed so we can get those therapies back
You
again?
can get them in you can get them in Mexico and you can get them in Europe. I don't know that there's been a huge amount of success. It's really, really time consuming and expensive. So Provenge is that medicine.
Okay, cool. It was just a quick question. I don't want to divert from this. I was just wondering if, so it's good to know it still happens in other parts of the world. Great, thanks.
Did you get it?
No, but let me mess with my computer. It's starting to overheat. So let me just quit a bunch of stuff.
Karen, you can also send it to him via private chat. So
I
he'll
don't know. I don't know how to do that, boss.
I don't know
want
if
to
it's
text it to me,
I'll
Karen.
text it to you. Okay, there we go.
I know, we can private chat it.
all right. I'm just working on my computer real quick here. I have just like a MacBook Air, so it's starting to breathe heavy. It's on an 8, it's on mile 19, I think. All right, well, whatever. Yeah.
Okay, I just sent it to Sean and Shayna. So if you could get it to Dr. Rubin, that'd be great.
Oh,
Shane will do that. It'll come in your chat on your Zoom, Dr. Rubin.
okay. Oh.
Got
Oh,
it?
Yeah. hang on.
It was a long time ago, but it was a really interesting case.
What?
It was
That
the
was-
first time I had the opportunity to see you go from beginning all the way through. It was just woke me up to a whole new world.
Let me see something. I'm just going to look at the protocol real quick. Wow, this was a long time ago.
Yeah.
So we did use colonic hydrotherapy. Oh, that was Grout who used that. Oh yeah, we were able to do things through Dr. Grout. Looks like she was being treated for Lyme, naltrexone. We ran a detoxogenomic profile. We ran
Yeah, and she had some real issues that showed up in that.
we ran something called interleukin 10, which at the time I thought was really related to lymphoma. So it was interleukin 8 was elevated. And we took an anti-VEGF perspective. Honestly, this was really a detox case. We'll talk about it later.
Okay.
Thank you. All right. Are you going to shoot a case at me?
I have a great case.
Yeah, I was gonna say, Nan, tell them this, your case.
Well, I have a patient right now who has what's known as a ROS1 lung cancer. And it's a genetic cancer in that it has to do with the tyrone kinase inhibiting. And so he takes a drug for that. And like you were saying, not normal chemotherapy agents, you know? So at first he took this drug called Rosaltrex or entrectinib, and it really worked on 80% of his tumors. And this ROS1 that he has is the doctors where he lives in Reno don't really know about it. So he had a doctor at Stanford, but he also contacted doctors at the University of Colorado who are specialists in pulmonary medicine. And so he went there and they wanted him to take, it's worked on 80% of the tumors, this Rosaltrex. It's worked on, but now he has pleural sac cancer and he also has it in his adrenal gland, and he has a catheter in his pleural space where he has to drain twice a day. And so now he got okayed for the chemotherapy. So he started the chemotherapy, but his insurance wouldn't cover the entrectinib because they felt that it was an experimental treatment. So Genentech, we reached out to Genentech and they were able to give him the drug for free. So he's on this combination of drugs that's really new. And so I'm not sure what to expect. And then to put on top of all that, he's a diabetic, an insulin-dependent diabetic. So whenever he receives his chemotherapy, he receives a really big dose of the methylprednisolone. He receives a really big dose of that. So he's kind of has to think ahead about his insulin, you know. But luckily he has one of those little Libra things on his arm, so that all he has to do is wave his telephone in front of his arm and it tells you his blood sugar level. So that's one good thing, but that's where we're at right now. But no one has talked to him at all about any kind of labs, nothing about his nutrition, nothing about what he should do about exercise, nothing about anything.
That's the point.
Yeah, and so here he is seeing all those doctors, but not one has mentioned it.
Yeah, and nobody's talking detox, immune support, nothing.
Yeah, exactly. Duh. I mean, that's the point.
So
That's
I
why
guess
we
right
really
now,
look-
yeah.
They look at the tumor, but they don't do anything else. They're not doing anything else. That's Stanford, right? Like, that's like the greatest smart guys, right?
Exactly.
How would you approach something like that, Dr. Rubin?
I would probably talk to him about diet and lifestyle and the care of the human frame and the human physiology and the physique, and that, you know, talk to him about what he wants out of life and how he wants to live, and if we can change and lower his insulin requirement. And, you know, you just took a medicine that's selected out only for the cells that were ROS1 positive. The other cells that were not ROS1 positive, because tumors are always heterogeneous, those are the ones that were allowed to live. So it's the same thing with prostate cancer. Put somebody on androgens, and eventually you develop androgen independent prostate cancer. They kind of work, but then they don't work anymore. Why? Not all the cells are sensitive to testosterone. Not all these cells are ROS1 positive. So they did a really good job of suppressing the ones that were, and they didn't do anything for the ones that weren't. And now look where he is. He's got adrenal metastases. He's got tubes coming out of his body.
Right.
He's probably on Taxol, which is why he's getting prednisone or methylprednisolone. It's my guess. And so he's spiking his sugars, which not such a bad thing, because it's kind of like you're feeding the cancer a lot of sugar at the same time you're feeding it chemotherapy. So maybe you're increasing the sensitivity of chemotherapy, of the cancer cell, the chemotherapy. But yeah, I mean, I don't think you need me to tell you what to do. You already said it, what they didn't do.
Oh, I thought you were going to be like, you give me the whole answer to everything.
Well, I wouldn't do that because he's not my patient and that wouldn't be protecting the patient. And I couldn't because I don't know the case. I don't know the guy. I don't know that he wants to. I don't know that he wants to do anything like that. But that is the whole answer. That's the point, is there isn't a formula. The formula is how do you approach a person from an N of one? And that was what I was saying about functional medicine. That's why I don't look at the PhD sheets on the back. That's the simple part. So if you wanted me to say like, oh, tell me what chemo he's on and I'll give you a protocol, I don't know that I'd be helping the patient. You know, we developed this formula called CTC formula, circulating tumor cell formula. And by the way, I'm not here to treat your patients. I'm here to teach you how to think. That's what I've been asked to do. And I sit on our licensing board for many years. And I started the Oncology Association, and I run a practice in a way. All of these are there to protect the public because that was the highest oath that I took when I got my license. And so I know that. And so for me to be presumptuous and treat a patient who's not my patient, I can't do that. But helping to teach you how to think, teaching students how to go out and disperse knowledge in the world, there's value in that, which is why I'm talking today.
Well, as you know, our work, you and I have been talking and working together for a number of years. What is the basic message that you would like all of us to have about naturopathic oncology? Make us messengers.
Yeah, naturopathic oncology does everything that people want to do in oncology that conventional medicine just doesn't do. And Ms. White, your case was the quintessential awesome case. You said it right there. They gave a medicine for one stinking thing and one type of cell only, disregarded everything else about the person. And that person is one whole functioning unit that for some reason had a switch that got flipped and itself went awry. It's his own, cancer arises within oneself. It is part of self, which is why it's so difficult to treat. The goal is to kill the cancer without killing the whole self. That's the goal. That's the conventional medicine philosophy, or it's to control the disease. Small molecules are meant to control, and they only focus on one thing. And normal ROS1 in the body, I don't even really know normal ROS1. So it's going to interfere with certain processes when you inhibit ROS1. But as you can see, it not only ignored the non-ROS1 cells, but it gave them power. And it spread metastasis. Now what is he on? Now he's on chemotherapy. And now they're, nobody, like you said, is controlling his sugars. And I don't know what the fate of this gentleman is. Once you have tubes out of your body, that's hard to recover from, especially if you have uncontrolled sugars. He has a fancy glucose monitor, but that's fancy. What's not fancy is changing the diet. It's not fancy. So a lot of times it doesn't get attended to. I don't know, he's at Stanford. They should have the best dietitians in the world there.
Not
Right.
one person talked to him.
Quintessential case. You nailed it. That's why I can't tell you what to do, because you already know what to do.
Yeah, we've been doing it too.
Get him out of, he can be there for his medicine, but get him out of there for his lifestyle stuff. Nobody cares about it.
Wow,
Get
thank
into
you.
a private world where people, are not, it's like CTCA, Cancer Treatment Centers of America. One of my very best friends, Dan Kelman, is the chief of naturopathic medicine at Atlanta. He built the heck out of that program, right? And they just whittled away at it. He had like 12 NDs and acupuncturists and chiropractors, and now there's like 3 of them or something. But regardless of the team, they were still limited on what they could do. So a lot of times they would refer people to me because I can do whatever I want because I'm in private practice. Well, I just have to watch my licensure. And so,
Well, speaking of that, you do work with patients nationally, correct? So if one of us has a case that comes up, would that patient in the face of COVID have to sit in front of you times once, or can you do the whole thing virtually?
the whole thing virtually.
Okay.
Speaking of virtual, I mean, that guy right there, if his kidneys can handle it, he might be a great candidate for keto. You know, it might be if he likes to eat that way, or, and so, I mean, I'm certainly not a keto expert, but there are plenty of nutritionists virtually who can help that person, your patient.
That'd be great. Yeah. I just have to think outside the box and not think that Stanford has all the answers, because they obviously don't.
Totally.
Can you talk more about keto and what are some of the benefits of that?
Well, there's only one real benefit. Keto is, you know, the ultimate low carb diet. And the whole idea is that some people respond really well, and it can reverse chronic disease. Diabetes is a big one. I mean, insulin dependent, but especially non-insulin dependent diabetes. There's a lot of push for it in the world of oncology because, you know, tumors feed off cancer cells feed off sugar. And it just basically changes your dynamics around. And for a lot of people, they have improved body composition, they lose or they normalize their weight, they need less sleep, they have clearer thought, they have more energy, they can perform better athletically. And it really normalizes them because they're so heavy on carbs. And because they're pulling out carbs, they're generally pulling out gluten and a lot of grains, like, you know, grains are so inflammatory, and corn, you know, a lot of those they're pulling out. And because most people tend towards an animal product type keto, then they're pulling out a lot of like soy products that some people may be sensitive to. But some people do vegan keto and they do really well. But keto is just, you know, minimizing your carbs, generally below 50 grams per day. I'm not an expert in keto. I understand it. We had a keto program at our clinic for a while. We don't anymore. We are just about to launch a little ebook on our website about our philosophy of eating. It's probably, it might even be posted now. I mean, we just wrote it out of just whatever, just because it takes a lot of time to talk to people about diet. And so we just decided that we would throw it up on the website. So it'll be up there hopefully by next week if it's not up there already. And it's just an ebook.
Well, because I mentioned it briefly yesterday. So I'm pretty sure I had COVID this winter. I'm a pretty healthy person. I've been eating organic forever. My dad died 47 of a heart attack, and it changed my life. And I pursued a very healthy lifestyle since then. And, you know, always with areas of improvement, but my diet is great. I grow my own food. I've got exercise, yoga, stress management, all of that. But when I got COVID, I work a frontline worker in a hospital, and you know, it came to our community before we did testing, and everybody at the hospital, we've had all the symptoms, and I got super sick. I put myself on a keto diet and I felt really great. I did the Boston Heart blood panel. All my inflammatory markers were really mostly good, but my lipid panel freaked out. My fibrinogen level is really high. And, you know, I'm I'm feeling great on the keto diet, and I followed it pretty carefully. And just kind of working through all of that. But I found that all of those things that you said about the keto diet were totally true.
And there's a lot of people who have really freaky lipids, but it depends how deep you dig in those lipids. So if you're just doing HDL, LDL, VLDL, cholesterol.
No, I did the whole breakdown, the LP little a and all of that stuff.
Was your LP little a high?
I'm trying to remember which one. I know that my there's the ApoA and the LP little a, the ApoB and the ApoA. My LP little a was fine.
Right, and your small LDLs were probably fine, and you're looking at the sizes. So that's the big point, is if you don't really look, if you just look on the surface, which is kind of what this discussion is about, then it could look scary, but the surface only tells you the surface, right? It's like getting to know somebody. So a lot of people have really scary lipids, and a clinical pro that we found is that we thought that IGF-1 is a tumor growth, almost like a holo growth factor for all lymphomas, leukemias, and solid tumors, but it actually decreased when people went on keto, even a heavy animal keto diet and a dairy heavy diet, which was just like, all right, well then maybe IGF-1 is really only stimulated for production by the liver by animal products and animal acids when somebody is in an inflamed state. that was a hypothesis, because we kind of freaked out and we're like, oh my God, even in people who had already had high IGF-1s. Anyhow, the other thing you said is that your fibrinogen level was really high. Did you only measure fibrinogen, or did you get specific about it?
It's only the fibrinogen.
So you can do a gross fibrinogen level, but what you really need to do is a fibrinogen antigen, which is the presence of the fibrinogen, and then a fibrinogen activity. And so many times I will see, and this is why I said you got to look around the whole picture. We talked about, so you can have a lot of production of fibrinogen, but if it's not being acted upon, it's not really an issue. And then that's why you look at the plasminogen activator, the thrombin, antithrombin, and the D dimers, because you got to look, fibrinogen's right here. You got to look before and after the whole thing. So you might have been producing a lot of it, and that might have been because there was a different type of inflammation. Maybe you had interleukin 6 at the time, because interleukin 6 stimulates the liver to produce CRP and fibrinogen. And look at fibrinogen as the chronic form of C-reactive protein. That's another
My
real.
CRP, all my inflammatory markers look great. And truthfully, I just think it was the COVID that kind of freaked me out. And I think it just took me a while to come through my body. But yeah, anyway, it was just, and I think what you're talking about in terms of teaching and trying to impart this philosophy about really kind of, and, we're all nurses, we're Western trained, we've been looking at, but here we're stepping to the side to look at things in a more comprehensive way. And I can imagine people with cancer, that come to you, they probably are a little bit feeling like they're putting themselves at risk to maybe look at alternative ways of treating a cancer, And so, do you find that some of the, talk about your existential and philosophy, I'm sure in your assessment, that's one of the things that you look at, you talked about someone who's a genealogist or trying to find the right lens to communicate with someone so that you can get a really better view of how to, do the teaching as a doc, which education is such an important part of all of this to help people. And yeah, just listening to you speak and your style and approach is really useful for me because, I've been studying Chinese medicine a long time too. And I sometimes just feel like I have to visualize my brain as being a little thin on the end so I could, stretch my mind enough to think with a different philosophy, which is what this talk is providing for me this morning.
Good. Awesome. Thank you.
Could I ask a question? I have had 2 friends succumb to glioblastomas in the last 4 years. What is your experience in treating those? And do you see, I think everything from Western medicine is just immediately. My husband's a general surgeon, so the minute we find out, he goes, well, that's that. I think the mindset is just that there's nothing to do. And,
Wait, glio, you said?
Glio, yeah.
Is one of my favorite types of people to treat.
Really?
We do so amazingly well with people over the long term. We do say long term. I just don't see people enough with glioblastoma multiforme. We used to be really well connected with Barrows Neurological, which is a world-class institution out here in Phoenix. And
one friend went to Mayo and one went to Sloan Kettering.
How did they do?
And they're both dead.
Yeah, now I don't know when that was, but nowadays that we have tumor treating fields or the Optune mechanisms that people can wear the head devices.
One did that at Sloan Kettering. He passed away. Well, his diagnosis was actually 2 years ago, October 1st. And I think they gave him 16 months and it was about 16 months.
Yeah. What can I say? There is no question. Low glycemic diet has been proven to be useful for, So, that's a first knee-jerk reaction. You just pull the short, just do. Anti-angiogenesis, anti-inflammatory, and immune, and you got it. That's it.
Okay.
That's what you got to know. IV vitamin C, nowadays IV ozone. We do a lot of IV ozone for anything intracranial. It's a big deal for us.
Could you explain a little bit about IV ozone?
Yeah. So
why and how?
Did Dr. Grauch go over it at all?
No.
Ozone, the way you do IV ozone, this is literally giving ozone gas to a patient, actual gas. You basically, on a normal standard issue ozone, not like a high dose or a fancy multi-pass, you would have a bag of saline measured out, and you would drain, you would catheterize the patient, angiocath, and you would drain, you take blood out through the IV line and put it into the bag. So like retrograde flow in a certain amount, I think generally about 60 cc's. And then you would add a certain microgram amount, say 7,000 micrograms of ozone to the bag. And you could see that there's a fluid air level, obviously. And then you would invert the bag and you would see the blood become a nice, perky, bright red, really beautiful. And the red cells and the white cells have now absorbed the ozone. Then you deliver that back through the closed system, but the line, as it's delivered back to the patient, traverses through a 3-bulb ultraviolet machine. So you're using ultraviolet irradiation to the blood. So it's 2 treatments in one. And the basis of what you're doing there is you are greatly enhancing that person's antioxidant system.
Why the ultraviolet?
And you are also greatly enhancing their immunological capacity because it activates the immune system. And at the same time, via ozone, via ex vivo-ness, and via going through the ultraviolet machine, you're going to annihilate some viruses, and you can also blast apart some circulating tumor cells. So in a closed system, from a circulating tumor cell perspective, you're going to create antigen right there and right next to an activated immune cell. Hence that vaccination phenomenon we were talking about, creation of antigen. So that's one of the reasons why if I find circulating tumor cells, I may recommend IV ozone. Ozone is kind of standard issue in most European countries, and it's newer here, and it's certainly newer to me in the clinic. We've only been about 2 or 3 years with our ozone program. But it's really up and running, and ozone has really become popularized. We now have patients calling in and asking us for that kind of treatment. So we have a really nice ozone machine from Spain. And so that's basically what it does. And it's a really intense anti-inflammatory agent. And it has an effect on intracranial tumors. But if I had to pick, besides diet is if I only get to pick one thing, it's diet. But if they don't need a diet change, then I pick IV vitamin C. I really do, because we have kept people for years with glioblastoma doing well with IV vitamin C.
Do you do mega doses of IV vitamin C?
What's mega dose?
How many milligrams of IV vitamin C do you give?
Like
Depends.
50 grams,
50
25 grams.
For an average person. So use of IV vitamin C really depends upon the frequency, their body habitus, the bulk of the disease, what you're co-treating with. So there is an art to doing IV vitamin C. I could probably answer any question you have on IV vitamin C. And I consider myself a world expert in it, not egotistically. I think it's factual. With the work that we did with the Reardons back in the late 90s, early 2000s, and what we established and how we abolished its notion as a cancer chemotherapeutic, and been in the world of IV vitamin C for a couple decades. So if I had to give one particular dose to somebody, I'd say 50, as long as their G6PD quantitatively is fine, 50 grams given once a week to an average sized person, that's given, then you got to think about the rate. You don't probably at 350 milligrams per minute, it's very reasonable. That would be a very average dose.
What is G6PD?
Yeah. Oh, what is it?
Yeah.
So glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase is a enzyme that helps protect red blood cells from oxidative burst. And so the more vitamin C you give in a highly concentrated form at a faster rate, the more the oxidative stress on the body. The slower and lower, the less the oxidative stress, the more it's an antioxidant.
So you just need to do that lab beforehand to find out where they are?
Correct.
And Dan, do you accept the 23andMe one, or do you want a different GD6?
So I believe that all 23andMe reports have a caveat at the bottom that says that they are not allowed to be entered in a medical chart. So I accept none of it now.
That's what I was told.
Yeah, I saw that. I wouldn't accept it anyhow, just because I don't necessarily trust that lab. I've seen too many bad stuff, so I just run it from.
Yep.
I think from a safety and a liability perspective, I would just get it from LabCorp.
Is the G6PD a one-time test that you do?
Generally, yes, generally. And if you see a high so low G6PD is the problem. The high G6PD probably means they need the vitamin C from an antioxidative perspective. So a lot of people on chemotherapy have high G6PD because that system is just going nutso because they're so oxidatively stressed.
What about CBD and pediatric cancers, brain tumors?
Yeah, I think that there is a role for that. I think that there's a role for THC probably more. CBD, you got to be really careful because I operate under the auspices that it's really immunosuppressive, especially the higher you go. And I think
CBD is immunosuppressive?
Yeah, I'm really careful with it. And most people, I generally use it. So neuroblastoma, I use 3, 4, 5 milligrams per kilogram when I need to try and get some tumor suppression. But otherwise, I'm basically using it from a symptomatic perspective. So like 0.5 to about 0.5 milligrams per kilogram. So you got to think in those terms too. So many people are like, oh, take 10 milligrams. It's like 10 milligrams acts differently in different people. So I really encourage people when they think about dosing to think about body weight dosage. So that's how I tend to think or get to know your thing really well. And that's what those PhD sheets won't necessarily tell you per se. CBD, yeah, I most at a symptomatic level, I don't think it's immunosuppressive. But look, in a leukemia or a lymphoma, hey, that could be great if you're suppressing those. I mean, data's really clear on that. So that's why we know there's more coming out about its immunosuppression. But I've operated under that pretense for a long time. So I've been
talking about immunosuppression. There's been in the last, 7 or 8 years, maybe not that long, immunotherapy. You mentioned before several different types. Could you talk to us a little bit about that and why and how it works? And does it still have to be preceded by chemo as it used to be in the early days? I mean,
how about after a 5-minute break?
5-minute break is great. Well, I'll stand up and breathe.
Thank you so much. This is wonderful.
Isn't he something? Please, you're not asking questions. He's here to answer your questions. I keep pumping him, but
I just wrote one to you.
okay.
Maybe you could read it, and when the time is right, maybe you could ask.
Yeah, well, how did you send it to me?
Oh, on the chat.
Oh, on the chat. Okay.
Like a case study, maybe?
Why don't you ask him?
Well, I don't know when. I don't want to take him off of his whatever his thought train is, or what anybody else. I don't want to change the topic. I don't know when is a good time.
Okay. All right. I'll work it in.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
What do you guys think so far? Are you learning?
Oh, it's amazing. I'm pulling up my glucose PD quant.
Yeah.
He truly is a world leader. So take advantage of the time we have with him.
And did he say that he does take patients?
He
via
does.
video?
He
Okay.
takes patients. I just brought him one from Florida.
I have someone to send him from Houston.
He is astonishing.
Yeah.
You watch him work with a patient. You know, he is a philosopher, he's an ethicist. And when he says N1, that means every single individual is an individual, and that's how he approaches it.
It's just like,
That's so amazing.
yeah.
It is amazing. Watch him work. I'll tell you what, if you bring him a patient and you're going to be on the Zoom, they use something else besides Zoom. You watch something else, you watch him work with that patient, you'll just be amazed. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
So I'm going to get up and stretch for a minute,
me
and he'll
too.
be back in just a minute.
Hello?
Suzanne, good morning. It's Bonnie.
Hey, Bonnie, I tried to call you this morning.
I know. Well, I'm in school. I'm on my final week of school. We're on a 9 to 5. I was supposed to be in Arizona for a week for my last week, and now we're doing it.
Mute, please.
Sorry.
Oh.
Well, I just got up and ran on the treadmill for 3 minutes. Ah. Get the blood moving again.
Good for you, Karen.
Forgot to put my earphones back in. Just ran for 3 minutes on the treadmill. Now things are actually moving again.
Back. All right, what were we talking about?
Immunotherapy.
Oh, right. I don't know a ton about immunotherapy, but you're talking about, these are monoclonal antibodies to program death ligand 1. And the immunotherapy, it's no different than old school immunotherapy. It's just a different target. I mean, Herceptin is an immunotherapy, right? It's an antibody. So technically it's an immunotherapy. Those are the classic ones. And so anytime you hear a drug name that ends in MAB, that stands for monoclonal antibody. So like Herceptin's trastuzumab, Keytruda's pembrolizumab, Opdivo's nivolumab,
Rituximab.
rituximab. Yeah, I mean, rituximab, it's a monoclonal antibody. So you're just putting it at a target. This ipilimumab, which is that Yervoy, which kind of was the initial immunotherapy, and that it just targets a little bit different part of the T cell. So the PD-L1 inhibitors inhibit, or they try and neutralize program death ligand, which basically is a key that the cancer cells put into a lock. They lock a lock on the T cells. And if you take away the key, then it remains unlocked and they're free to do what they want to do. So if that's PD and that's PD-L1 and it's literally stuck in the lock, if you have an antibody to this, takes it away, and the T cells are free to do what they need to do. And so that's not always the case. Sometimes you can get a PD-L1 test and there is no PD-L1. So you can look for PD-L1 on like a circulating tumor cell, or if you get if your patient gets like a Caris or a Foundation 1 or a Guardant test. So if you can look in the blood, so you can look for PD-L1 floating around in the blood, but you can also see that in autoimmune disease, so it can also treat your patient's autoimmune disease. And sometimes diabetes is autoimmune, as we know. If you drink too much dairy, you can get, I don't know if you know that pathway, but just as an aside, since we brought up a patient with bad diabetes. But the problem with PD-L1s is that they can create hyperstimulation, and you can actually have people that develop autoimmune hepatitis. You can develop autoimmune colitis or just an inflammatory colitis. You can get a pneumonitis. And so somebody raised their hand.
I've had that from the rituximab.
From the rituximab, interesting.
Colitis. It's very rare, but of course I sign up for those things.
And then did you resolve it?
Quit the rituximab. It took the whole entire 7 months. And then as the rituximab wore off, I got better. I've never had colitis before, and I hope to never have it again.
Oh, and then it just went away.
It just went away as whichever SNP it makes is also used for a gut protective factor. So they tell me.
Yeah, Rituxan is an antibody to something called cluster designation 20, which is prevalent on B cells. So it's used for B cell NHL, which I'm assuming, which also it's kind of like Herceptin, which is to HER2/neu or human epidermal receptor 2, which is also cardiac relevant. So people get cardiac toxicity from it.
Yeah.
So
Dr. Rubin, quick question. They're using something with monoclonal therapy with Trump right now. What do you know about that?
I don't know anything.
Okay.
So I honestly haven't looked at it. I worked really late yesterday.
I thought it was antiviral was the one they were working on.
They're doing
Remdesivir.
But monoclonal was one of the terms that they keep bringing up.
I don't know. I mean, yeah, whatever. We probably shouldn't talk about that. So my approach is with immunotherapies. We got really terrified when when they first came out, that was one of those other instances where we had our protocols given to pharma because we're like, what the hell do we do? Or what don't we do? Like, well, nobody knew. It was just like a brand new class of drug, and they were in clinical trial. And so we got through the clinical trial. Patients are very well still alive, decade later. And then we had our first patient on label, was an 83-year-old gentleman with stage 3 melanoma, which he was untreatable otherwise. We had him stabilized, but he went on Keytruda. We kept him on like naltrexone, melatonin, like a lot of the things that actually that are manage T cells and natural killer cells. And he went into like an immediate remission. It was amazing. So we're like, all right, well, maybe we, because we were too scared that we would overstimulate the immune system or somehow we would block something because you really didn't know. But we found our way, and we now, for me, my mainstay for immunotherapy is to reduce the risk of the organs that are at risk. The colon, the liver, the thyroid, I mean, all these things that can be hyperstimulated, protect them. Take sea buckthorn for the gut. It's an omega-7 fatty acid that's easily attainable, well tolerated, and give them milk thistle for the liver, reduce toxic burden, get the inflammatories out of their system, get them ready to receive an immune treatment, get them ready to receive that. So the vessel has to accept it. You don't want to put something into a dirty vessel; it's just going to get dirty. So helping people clean up and really accept that and have a smooth, non-inflammatory immune response. That's what I do. And, some data came out just recently about how pembrolizumab and vitamin C work better together for colon cancer. I think it was for colon cancer. But I was like, there we are. I mean, we kind of knew it. I mean, we already proved it just by giving it to patients. So.
Well, here's an unrelated question. There has been more talk lately, a repeat of the use of NAD to slow down aging and all the wonderful things that it can do, blah, blah, blah. We were talking about this yesterday with Dr. Tim Marshall, who's a biochemist and neuropharmacologist that I want to introduce to you. Anyway, my question is, if NAD does all this enlivening, of telomeres, and what does it do to any senescent cancer cells that might be floating around in there?
I think you're right. So we don't really know. And we brought it into the clinic, gave it to ourselves, studied it, and decided not to use it because we thought it might be a risk. That was about 3 years ago.
Yeah, that was my question.
Looking at it.
Yeah. One of the, and I lost the note. So Lucy, would you ask your question, or was it Helene, about the 5-year-old child?
Yeah, I was wondering if you could talk about a case study of any child under 5 that came to you, what they came with, just a case study and what the outcome was, just for an example.
I mean, I can make one up because I don't remember one.
That's fine. Make it up.
They generally come, almost exclusively with neuroblastoma or acute leukemia.
Oh, okay.
And they're always on chemotherapy protocols, always. And the only way that I will take a case outside of that is if CPS doesn't get involved.
Okay.
If I don't get into it. I am not like a heroic person that's like, come to me out, I don't have the tools, especially at a distance, and I can't prove that I can do better than chemotherapy. So, the amount of chemo, and I provide supportive care, and I can tell you that the amount of stuff that happens in a pediatric oncology case is like 1,000 times more than happens in an adult case. So if I talk to them, even if I talk to them every 3 weeks, so much has transpired. There could have been 4 hospital admissions, 5 transfusions, 5 antibiotics. It's like, I can't keep up. So I do the best that I can, and we provide supportive care. It's incredibly intense, and I'd love to know if anybody has experience in that realm, pediatric oncology. Because if they do, the outcomes, are up and down. I mean, it depends when I see them. I mean, I think we just got, I just heard from a mom and from our staff, we just got a slew of calls, like 20 calls, because our name, we had an amazing case where scans all of a sudden just went to nothing. Everything was necrotic, and it was all after we started our treatments. Um, and so the mom's like, once a mom says something, then every other mom is like, oh my God. Like, and then we get a bunch of calls because they are looking for something like that. And I'm not making fun of them. It's like, it happens like that. And then we have to be careful on what we can sustain in our practice, because we don't want to give people, false sense of security. But routinely amazingness when we're included routinely. And so we actually developed our own line of kids herbals. It's called NS Kids, and they're all glyceride formula, and we formulated them, and then they're made in Sedona by Herbal Vitality. Just because we needed to, right? There wasn't anything out there. And so we have like a blood builder, an energy builder, an appetite stimulant. We have thinking formula. We developed thinking formula for a 13-year-old who's going through maintenance for leukemia and just couldn't think well. And so, and it worked beautifully. And so we called it it's her name, the thinking formula. We have something called FNP6, which FNP stands for nerve pain. And there's 6 things in there. And I just talked to a mom yesterday whose child is about to go through antibody therapy. So like at Sloan Kettering, they have their own humanized antibody. It's called 3F8, and it's for neuroblastoma. So it's basically to neurological embryonic cells. And so when they get it, they go through like horrendous nerve pain.
Oh,
Because
wow.
you're giving antibodies. I mean, you're inflaming the heck out of your nerves. I mean, it's brutal. And so we made they're going on heavy dosages of opioids. So we give them homeopathics. I basically gave a list of what to try in a row just to try and help them. And so for nerve pain is our attempt at helping them, so they can, even if they can come off the opioids early or not have as much steroids or something.
Thank you.
So if you give
Would that nerve pain formula work for people with peripheral neuropathy?
It's not formula. It's not strong enough.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, I guess it never just translated. I guess it maybe could. I don't know. It's more that is more nerve pain, not really neuropathy, which is more numbness, tingling, which is a deficiency versus an attack.
Okay.
So it's a different mechanism.
Okay. What can we do to prepare the body for radiation therapy and protect it?
Great question.
What do you mean protect it? Oh, you mean, well, you don't protect it. That's the thing. And so you can't just give something to the body and hope that it protects the normal cells and ignores the cells that are being radiated, which is why I had mentioned before that what I had done is I distilled my protocols down to focusing on the immune system. And I tell people there's the 2 main things that you do during radiation, if you want to feel as good as you can, is you hydrate and you exercise. If I told you nothing else, I'd be doing a lot of service and I'd be doing my diligence as a physician. It's that whole inflammatory theory. Radiation is about oxygen dynamics and quenching bad ions. But you got to do it internally. You can't take it externally. Now, I know there's data out there that suggests giving antioxidants doesn't harm and it doesn't reduce survival or disease-free survival, but I still don't give them. I do it as food. I don't give Frank. I mean, yeah, okay. So my standard IV vitamin C protocol, when people are on radiation, is you start during week 3 and you give 10 to 15 grams to an average sized person. Friday afternoons only, 2 hours after radiation. That's how we do it. Otherwise, we stay away. And so, somebody's bouncing around in a car and it's blinking on my screen. bottom corner.
TJ, are you on, in your car? TJ,
Yes,
could you cut your video?
Thank you.
yes.
Thank you very much. It was just, I was losing my train of thought. So I gotta say, just thinking anti-inflammatory. I mean, think about radiation as a bad sunburn. And the idea is to overwhelm the body's superoxide dismutase system. That's what a sunburn is. You know, why does a tree not get sunburned? It constantly produces antioxidants. That's it. Why do we eat plants? Duh. So, you know, we live in Arizona, right? So like we can talk about this stuff. I'm looking at those trees out there. And so what happens when a tree dies? It looks like it gets burnt. It gets all shrivelly and brown because it stops producing those things, right? So do we. So when we get sunburnt, you've had photonic energy hitting your skin, and so often, so much in a concentrated period of time that you can't produce enough superoxide dismutase. So the skin gets injured because you can't heal it. But then eventually you heal it. So that's same type of photonic energy, very similar rays get delivered to the body and you overwhelm that system, but it requires oxygen for effect. Protons don't, but all photons do. And so if you're going to go through radiation, you might as well get the effect. So I tell people to exercise before radiation. Why? Reduce the fibrinogen, reduce the inflammation. Somebody's giving thumbs up. That gets, for me, there's no book on it. It's just like, all right, well, if you need oxygen, then how do you get oxygen there? You get oxygen there, right? And most people don't have good oxygen. You know, people who are sick don't have good oxygen, and they're not getting oxygen in good places, which is part of the reason they're sick. Then another thing I give is something called germanium sesquioxide. It's organic germanium. It's a powder. It's an immunostimulant, but it also has 6 atoms of oxygen on a sesquioxide molecule, and I use it as an oxygenator. And then I just focus on the immune system. I give things that stimulate the immune system because you want to reduce interleukin-6 and you want to get the immune system to find those dying cancer cells.
Well, one of the things that I've noticed that you use on patients a lot is hinokiol.
Yeah, so as an anti-VEGF and an anti-mTOR. So I think of it as an anti-cancer. It's also great for exercise recovery, so it can double as that, and a relaxing agent.
Okay.
That's another Isaac Elias product.
Really?
Yeah, he brought it out. Yeah, that's the only one to use because it's 98%.
Okay. What are some of the immune boosting strategies that you use that you have found to be helpful?
Sleep, exercise, diet, anti-inflammatory, and then I like bacterial extracts like that. There's one called Russian Choice Immune.
Oh, that was a new one on me. Could you talk about that for a minute? I'd never seen that.
You know, well, you're used to me using Imkine.
Yeah.
We developed back in the days of the immunology when we were doing the vaccines. So they're the same. They're extracts of bacteria. They're extracts of probiotics. They're not probiotics. They're extracts. So it's basically the immunostimulatory moiety from the membrane of the bacteria or the cell wall of the bacteria. That I mean, why do we have an immune response to a bacteria? There's something we're reacting to, right? That's what's in the product. So you get an acute immune stimulation. So you hop up your antigen presenting cells, your mobile ones. And that way you're picking up antigen from the apoptotic cancer cell. That's the strategy. That's my strategy. And in doing so, and if you balance it correctly, then you reduce interleukin-6 so the patient feels a whole heck of a lot better. Day 11 is when they start to get tired, especially with like a 6 to 9 week radiation protocol. I mean, they're going every day, getting on the table, they're putting a mask on. You know, it's cold, it's stark, it's every day, they're getting fatigued, especially some people have a really long drive to the radiation facility. So it can get really fatiguing. But that's why if you just engage your natural systems via exercise, I consider exercise 20 minutes of sweating. That's what I consider it. And then it's just like I consider hydration peeing 9 times a day. It's like you don't have to measure it for each person. Everybody's different. So I just decided to put standards on it. And I think it makes life easier.
Is it really 9 times a day?
What?
Is it really 9 times a day?
For me, in my practice, that works, because it sounds like
Uh-oh.
not that much. No, but then I say they should be vigorous and full of vigor and not too yellow, and you shouldn't struggle to get it out. And, you're hydrated. But if you think about going 9 times a day, it's not that big of a deal. I mean, most people probably 6 or 7. So
Yeah,
then,
and if you're in your 70s, a lot of that's at night.
okay, right, and that doesn't include at night.
I'm going to look up the germanium sesquioxide, and it says there's a ban or something with it, something with a compound to make it.
Oh, well, is it the Allergy Research Group brand?
It's this science-based medicine article.
I would just look up an Allergy Research Group.
I'm looking it up wrong. There's not too much on, I did find
But
the one.
there's a
that-
link. There's a link to allergy research group in the chat, and it takes you right to Russian Choice.
Yeah, Russian Choice pops up too, but this was just one that had the full name in there. And so it just popped up saying that there was a ban or something. I don't know. It was on the science base.
On Allergy Research.
If I was looking it up incorrectly or.
I would just use that link. I think that'll take you right there.
No, I think she's talking about germanium.
Oh, germanium.
The germanium one, the germanium sesquioxide. I'm probably butchering that.
So you get it from allergy.
You're still using that, right? The germanium one.
You have to use it sublingually. You can't use it. You can't swallow it.
Okay.
It won't work. That's just my protocol. I don't know that anybody else is actually using it.
Okay. Well, during the short break, I was talking to the students and telling them that you work remotely and that they absolutely need to watch you do an intake. If they do, several of them said, oh boy, I'm going to bring this patient, this patient, this patient. What do they do to get to you?
Oh, yeah, call our office or email us from there. So we changed things a little bit because our manager of 13 years left, thank God. And we revolutionized our process because, we took a look under the hood and we're like, hey, boy. So Debbie, my wife, Dr. Smolinski, who Karen knows well, is the head honcho. I just worked there. And so I think if there's an inquiry that is fielded from our website, it goes straight to her. She gets all of them. If there's an incoming call, then Jen, who's our new manager, does all the new patient calls. Jen.
So if they were to call your office, they should ask to speak to Jen?
They'll get routed to her anyhow.
The male guy that works there, is he still there or no?
Tom?
Yeah.
Only until the 16th of October, then he's out. And we'll have so he's the last of the admin. And then Andrea, who used to be there 5 years ago, she came back. So we've redone our system, which we needed to do. And so so Jen talks to, actually, even if you email, Debbie forwards it to Jen. So Jen calls all people. And then you would just say, I don't know if she even knows I'm talking to you guys today. Just say that you just tell her what we did. I'll tell her Monday about this.
So if they're going to email you or the office, they should do hello@listeningcare?
You can do hello, but it's better to inquire through the website.
Okay.
Or just call. Yeah. I guess you could ask for Jen. That'd be easy. And then she'll know. Maybe that's the best way. I didn't even think about it. And
I will send them all your website so they can get in there and look around.
I can tell you, if you want your client to get the most out of the consult, type up their history and send it to us in Word format so we can drop it into the chart so I don't have to recreate. Otherwise, I got to spend that first 15 minutes recreating it. Otherwise, I don't have to type it. We can talk about it. I can fill in my blanks, and then we can just kind of get into, and it also, I can start thinking about it beforehand. Otherwise I don't know what's going on and I have to think about it right then. So, but if you send it in a PDF, then I can't. You have to send it in a Word. So that's what we do with advocacy groups. And it really helps because you're spending all that time taking that history and then
That-
giving it to me.
I'm looking at your website just out of curiosity, and I've been thinking this throughout. How much do you do in autoimmune disorders and like just?
I don't really do much. Only if it's a come along or if we have something to do with it. But like our other two doctors do.
Okay, but you do in the practice. There's people.
Yeah, in fact, so Dr. Mia Darling, who's on that website, that's one of her foci.
Okay.
Dr.
What's your
Dr.
what's your thoughts on fasting protocols with cancer?
Yeah.
I'm curious.
And we have that in our diet book. So I would say very boldly that intermittent fasting is the best thing that's come to the diet revolution, maybe since like even better than Whole30, even better than the conception of the anti-inflammatory diet. That's the biggest revolution, I think.
And are you looking at 12 hours, 14 hours?
16 is like the golden zone.
Dan, what about like
Sixteen?
Congo and his like fast mimicking diet? Do you know about that?
I don't do it. We did it.
What do you think?
The Prolon stuff? Yeah, it's not in my practice. I don't have a huge opinion.
I can tell you in my experience, I started at 12 and just listened to my body, and you just, you have to go through a little bit of, a trial to see where you're at, and you got to eat enough fat. And after that, the body just purrs at a really great energy level, and you just kind of go with what it is. I also find truthfully that when that sensation of what could be considered hunger, when it comes up, I just think about it, see what it means. I think about children in Africa. I just start thinking, okay, what is going to be my next meal, and then it just passes. And so my body kind of hit a natural for 16 pretty regularly, but I mostly just eat when I, feel like it works in my schedule. And I know that I could sit and chew and swallow and absorb the nutrition the best. And sometimes I can't do it at 16 and I do it at 14 or, but my body is loving the fasting thing. And I when I work at the hospital, I work really, really hard. And I find that my energy just stays even all day for 14 hours.
Dr. Rubin, did you say 16 was your golden number?
I think that's just based on the data, that's where the benefit. So I say 14 to 16 is what I tell patients.
Thank you.
I can't, there are people that can't do it. I can't do it at all. I can't.
Why
I
not?
start, my autonomic system gets tripped up. My heart rate goes through, I have dysautonomia POTS and all that stuff. And I start puking. I start sweating. My heart rate goes to like 160, 170. I can't. I've tried numerous times and I'm not, to be honest, I'm not willing to push through it.
What about like a little glucose in between? Would that help?
Why bother if it causes that much grief? Why would I want to push through that?
I think that would stop the symptoms.
Okay.
I don't know, Dan, what do you think?
Yeah. I'm just saying that not everybody can do it. I mean, that's just my point is that I mean, it's just not everybody can.
And
Okay. All right. We can talk more about the fasting off to the side at another time. We only have Dr. Rubin for just a few more moments. Yes, go ahead.
Dr. Rubin, what are your takes on, there was a biochemist or nutritionist, I'm not sure, but he says that children that consume just the regular hot dogs out of the store, nothing special about it, on a regular basis, like several times a week, they're prone to develop leukemia.
I don't know.
Because of the nitrite.
That's new to me. I'm all in on that one. Sounds good. Wow. I mean,
he says on a regular basis, they just look for it to happen because all of the nitrite in hot dogs that they consume.
Wow.
Yeah.
You know what? I have no idea. If there's something to back that up, that sounds reasonable. If it's conjecture, I don't know. I know there was something that came out about leukemia development and something in the microbiome, but I guess it didn't hold water enough for me to remember it. So yeah, no, I don't know.
Dr. Rubin, what has been your experience over the years working collaboratively with Mainstream Onc? Has it improved? Have you noticed a change in the tone?
Yes, good question. So all of the above. There's an absolute change in the tone, but that only comes when you know how to speak the language of the principles and practice of oncology. So I consider first you're a doctor, then you're either an ND or you're not, and then you're a specialist or you're not. So we're all docs, right? And so if I know how to speak medicine, probably going to get listened to by, I forgot whose husband is a general surgeon, I think Lucy's. And he may find that I have valid because I know the words, right? And I can say my case and I can say something he understands.
Oh, totally. And I think this whole, my taking this course, he is very open to all of this. I mean, I went through a health nightmare and he was right there with me, and he's seen some of the things that we've done. So I think he is totally open to all this, but he is trained as a general surgeon. I mean, it's.
I don't know how to do surgery. I mean, I can't do it. But then I've also not taken crap. And now, and that's a thing too. And people know it. And I have a position of power where I refer away. I'll refer to somebody who understands what we do and respects what we do, because chances are I've been doing it longer than they have. And I've seen those drugs more than they have, especially if you're a new doc. And
Right.
so just because you have a conventional, it's not a passport to go beyond me. And so my patients know and trust we know what we're doing. And so I'll just refer them out. Now, just this week, we had 2 new patients cancel. Well, no, sorry, 1 patient cancel because their doc wasn't in favor of them doing integrative care. And it was at MD Anderson in Gilbert, Arizona, which is pretty typical for them. I usually refer away from them because they're just, for the most part, even though I have 2 friends there, for the most part, they're just not favorable or nice. And so I ask my patient, if that's what you want for your healthcare, why would you want to hire a doctor? You hire them, you pay them. Why would you want to hire a doctor that didn't treat you the way you want to be treated? Like, there's tons of them out there. I'll give you 5 names right now. Look there.
Because they're afraid. Because people are afraid. They're cowed by God doctor.
Yeah.
And speaking about payment, do you take insurance? I mean, are you part of that, or is that out of pocket, or how does that work for your practice?
But
I'm sorry, could you?
We choose to not take insurance. People can
Okay.
get reimbursed, but yeah, we didn't jump in. But a lot of the lab testing is covered.
Right.
Dr. Rubin, another question. What type of outcome have you seen with your pancreatic patients? I have a friend, she was just recently diagnosed with pancreatic with mets to the liver, lung, and stomach lining, and she was also a transplant patient. So outcome usually with the pancreatic, because I know it's a pretty aggressive, that it's not very long.
I mean, I don't have any data on it, and that sounds like there's complexity that would put her as an N of 1, that she's not equal to all other patients.
That what? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
That she's an N of 1. If she was a transplant and she was on immunosuppressives, then she can't fall into the same category as everybody.
Right.
Dan, in the past, you had offered, and I don't know if this is still current, if we wanted to meet with you about our patients, that we could do so at a reduced rate. Is that
peer-to-peer?
Yeah.
Yeah, honestly, I don't know if we ever did that. And then
Nobody took advantage of it, which amazed me. I that's a lot of trouble for you. I don't know if you're willing to reinstate that.
Well, don't talk them out of it.
I'd have to think about it, because I'd probably not do it right now. We're pretty slammed, and I'd probably say, unless Karen, we'd have to talk about and put some parameters on, because if I can only tell treatment, unless somebody's a nurse practitioner and can actually prescribe on that, then I'm creating liability for myself and for the patient. I don't want to do it.
Okay.
If it's just info, if I'm not creating treatment, then it's not that big of a deal. I can provide, but I think it's best to stay in the formal range right now.
Okay, all right.
Thank you.
I have,
Go ahead.
okay. I was talking with a pediatric oncologist who tells me that in 50 years, the treatment has not changed, or the prognosis has not changed for osteosarcoma, that the survival rate is still about 2%, despite amputation, radiation, or chemotherapy. Do you have any experience with that with your pediatric patients that you treated?
I could not speak to you about any data. I don't pay attention to any of it. All I know
Okay.
is, but I don't think my patients are included in that, is my opinion.
Okay. So is the survival rate, I mean, do you have good survival rate with that?
You
Or is
know, I don't know that my patients stick with me for that long. You know, they in and out. I have no idea. I have no vehicle to keep track of that. I have no mechanism. It's not something I pay attention to. I know you're probably like, well, how do you know if you're doing well? I am an at the time doctor. You know, we're getting them through. And there's a lot of people they get better and then I just don't talk to them. I mean, I don't have any mechanism to keep track of patients like that.
Okay.
Not what I do.
Dan,
Well,
can you explain is it time?
Yeah.
Yeah, I do got to go in a few minutes, but that's fine.
We have time for a question or no?
Yeah.
Do you have, can you explain in terms that, like the way you do, cytokine storm, so that we can understand it?
What was the question?
Are you
Storm?
talking about COVID cytokine storm?
Well, you were talking about it a little bit earlier, and it's just something that I think we should know. And I'm just wondering if you can explain it. You have a way of explaining things to people.
Oh, what the cytokine storm is?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Go walk into a neonatal ward and just listen to what it sounds like. There's a cytokine storm. Imagine that's what's going on with your immune system. Then walk outside and go to the nurse's station and it's a lot quieter. And there's intelligent discussion going on, right? But you go back in the ward and the babies are screaming and crying because they just got born and they have tons of energy and they don't know how to express themselves. That's what a neutrophil does. It only lives for a few seconds, it just blasts out inflammatory cytokines because it's your first line of defense against an invading organism. So what do? You're just going to spray bullets, right? But then you're not doing the intelligent thing. The strategy is happening at the nurse's station where the nurses and the doctors are talking.
I knew you could do this.
Well, I think we've reached the end of our time. Dr. Rubin, I'm so grateful, truly. Thank you for spending this time. And I'm certain that your office will be getting some calls. And thank you. Thank you very much. You know what I'd like to do sometime is shadow you. Just sit there quietly in the corner smiling and just listen.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And everybody, please stay around.